Let me introduce myself a little bit, Clarence. My name's Steve Smith. I'm a registered dietitian. I've been working in the field for about 5 years now and have been studying nutrition for 10. So, I consider myself, pretty well read, but still a lot to learn in the field because it's just ever growing. I primarily work in post acute care and basically work with different doctors and nurses to help people um, stay healthy and live long, good quality lives. And a lot of what I see in the setting that I work is people with sarcopenia, muscle wasting, things like that. So I found you basically through Mike Mailer's podcast, one of the podcasts you did with him, and I started reading your articles a while back, and it really resonated with me. Basically, for those of you who don't know Clarence, he has over 65 years involved in the fitness industry. Been training, well, he's been training for decades. Like,
About the 65 years is right.
yeah. So,
Started when I was about 13.
okay.
Never stopped.
And you've written about 10 books now?
Yes, 10 books and 3 DVDs and almost 500 articles on our website, along with facts and news items. And of course, I wrote a column for Muscle and Fitness for 16 years. So I've been out there a lot.
Okay. The real reason I reached out to you was because basically your perspective on strength training and physical fitness, it varies from what you typically see pushed out in the media. We're constantly told as regular people that we need to be training as if we're athletes. So like 6 days a week, sometimes two a days. Otherwise, we're not going to get any results. And that's you know, maybe it's not pushed as hard anymore, but that's kind of the general idea that people have is if they're not in the gym all the time, they're not going to see good results. And how do you feel about that?
I think doctors are frustrated because they tell people they need to be more active, but they won't do it. And I think in a lot of cases, the doctors themselves don't do it. And I think what they forget is the only kind of exercise when you're planning your exercise plan, you have to look and think, am I going to be able to keep doing this while I enjoy it? And no plan works if you're not going to do it. So and if you can find something that you're good at, that you enjoy, and that gives you results, you got to have results. Progress keeps you motivated. So you got to start at a low level, have have some success, feel good about it, and then take the next step. Not try to take one giant step. If you've been completely inactive, start by taking a walk, or maybe even with just walking around the house. And you'll find you do feel better. Your mind works better. Everything works better, and then you can go on from there. I've written an article on our website about why New Year's resolutions don't work. They almost never work. It's because people try to bite off too much, uh, and within a couple of weeks, it's gone.
Right.
So you've got to plan one step at a time.
Okay. With me, I found out the hard way that training 6 days a week while trying to maintain a full time job, at the time, especially, I had two jobs. I was working, going to school. Um, so I basically started breaking down from that style of training. And then when I finally got in the nutrition field and started taking on clients, what I realized was a lot of people had this similar experience where they would start off maybe a few days a week and they may not be getting the results that they feel like they should be getting, so they start increasing the frequency, increasing the volume, and before they know it, they start to break down. Maybe they'll get sick, maybe they'll get a flu, whereas they didn't ever have that before. So I think the disconnect happens when average everyday hardworking people, especially with, a family, children to support, people with demanding jobs, they're being bombarded by the fitness industry telling them that they need to basically work out so often and with such a high volume, and if they don't, they're not going to get any results. And so it's this all or nothing mentality where basically that's not really what the research shows. And as you indicate in a lot of your articles, you can get results on very little volume and frequency. Am I
I
right?
think, I think one of the big breakthroughs has been the the growing population of interval training, mainly pushed by Professor Gabala from McMaster's University up in Canada. And he has a recent article about talking about interval, or I know he calls them snacks, but it's just going upstairs, walking upstairs about 3 flights of stairs, and doing that regularly. That you get some real results. It takes almost no time. Uh, if you understand that some people are going to have to walk up slower, other people will want to dash up, kind of do what feels good to you, and then ramp it up a little bit. And they see they have success from that, and maybe they want to branch out. But things, something like that, that get them started and have them a good experience, instead of go thinking that the only answer is more and more and more. Where the what really works is to train relatively hard on the weights. This is down the line someplace, of course, hard on the weights and hard on the aerobics, and then low level exercise, which helps you recover. But it doesn't slow down recovery. It increases the recovery. And what my wife and I do for that last part is simply to walk in the neighborhood. And they talk about going 10,000 steps. That's too many steps for most people.
Right.
I'm not comfortable doing. Carol is. 10,000 is nothing for her, but I aim for 7,000. It's comfortable. I do that with several walks during the course of the day, and somebody else might start with 3,000 or 5,000, just enough to get started. Getting a pedometer to measure that, that's a good motivator. So you find yourself out there in the evening because you didn't get your last few steps. Anyway, it makes it interesting, gives you a goal, something to shoot for, something that's not all that hard, but you'll see right away that you really feel better if you get some motion.
So, would you say that a detractor, something that would prevent motivation, would be, overexerting or overtraining yourself to the point where you can't recover for the next workout?
Absolutely, recovery is key. It's it's challenge, rest, grow. But if the challenge will not work if you don't have the rest part. So, uh, what was the famous coach from the University of Oregon who's the first started out with that? There's a wonderful book written about him, and he said that his coaching peers were kind of laughing at him and and criticizing him. He said he responded by beating them all at the championship. So he was Bowerman, one of the first coaches to really focus on the importance of rest,
Okay.
and really from the standpoint of motivation, people will accept that more than, as you say, trying to do it 6 days a week. You don't need to do it 6 days a week. In fact, I think as you get older, exercise becomes more and more important, but the rest and recovery part also becomes more and more important. What I do is I do one weight workout on Tuesday. The 2 different times I do one at home. We have equipment at home, and also at our office we have a full gym. So one week is at the office, the next week is at home. Variety is important. And then the other on Saturday I do a high intensity intervals, and a lot of different things. Uh, we live within about a block and a half of one. You can find a steep hill or a flat hill or anything you want out there, and it's just endless trails. So part of what my wife and I have been doing recently is just a little bit on the ski erg, which is a pull down action, and then on the rower, which is an extending action. So both of those together pretty much work the whole body. So we spend maybe about 15 minutes doing that, and then go out in the foothills. And it's the foothill workout that we do is hard, but it's exhilarating. We measure the steps, and it works when you get tired of doing something and you have to change. And I think that's a key point. When I sit down to think about a workout, I use my training diary. I look to see what I did the last time, and I'm looking for some way to improve. I try to improve in some way or other. That sounds crazy for somebody that's over 80, but it's true, because you can change the exercise, you can change the rep range. There's just a lot of things with a little imagination. You can almost always find some way that you can improve. And it's that type of thinking that will get you going and keep you going.
So in your book, Challenge Yourself, you basically, there's a quote: if I had to do it over again, I would start training with weights once a week earlier than I did. So why did you come to this conclusion? Was it a personal reason, or was it related to research that you read?
Well, no, it was more personal. Uh, I've always been of that mind. I wrote recently about a training partner and I visited in York, Pennsylvania, which was Muscletown, USA, the York Barbell Company, Bob Hoffman. They were the world champions. And I guess I was about 16 or 17, just to go there to be around the champions. And they were very nice to us. But I saw there that they were training, and I'd already gotten into Olympic lifting, so I was competing. But they were doing, a lot of these people were doing a lot more reps and volume than I was. It didn't make any sense to me. We were there for about 2 weeks. We made records. Made records the first couple of weeks. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, John Turpak, who was the manager of York Barbell and a world champion weightlifter, persuaded Hoffman, who was the publisher of Strength and Health magazine and the owner of York Barbell, to come in. When he came in and watched it, we missed all of our lifts. And it was because we were so overtrained by we got to that point. And when I came home, it didn't make any sense to me that I needed to train more. I think what I was doing was working. I made records there in the first few days, and then by being enthusiastic, being around all these great guys. Anyway, it was a good experience, and I've always been kind of the less is more thing. I was almost all weight training at first, and then after I read Dr. Cooper's book Aerobics, I decided that aerobics was important. But it took me a while to find out that intervals of years, I guess, that intervals are really what worked best. It took less time, it was more intensity, and you could have more time to rest. So this whole thing has evolved over a long period of time. Of course, writing books and writing articles kind of forces you to think about these things and how to put them in words, and so it makes sense to you and to your readers.
Right. And you mentioned Dr. Cooper. Is that Kenneth Cooper, the exercise physiologist? I think.
I've been going to the Cooper since I was 50 years old, so I've been there for 30 years.
So I want to say it was him that said it's not important to get more than 7 minutes of running.
Anything over 15 miles a week was for reasons other than health or fitness. Is what he said. I think he was right on the money there.
Okay.
I never ran that much. That's more than I want to do. But he's talking about people that are into running. But it focuses on you don't want to overdo.
Right.
They're not going to do it, and they're not going to recover. And these fellas that are, as you say, talking about competitive people that maybe they're going 6 miles a day. I can't even imagine going 6 miles a day.
Sure.
And most people wouldn't. I mean, that's not what you want to do. It may be necessary to win a marathon, but it's not necessary for health.
Right. So what originally turned me on to this idea of training less frequently and less volume was an article by a guy, Paul Ingraham. He's a massage therapist from Canada, but he does research reviews. And his article is titled "Strength Training: Less is More Than Enough." And so basically, what it talks about is, to sum it up, it's like the law of diminishing returns. So the first set is the most important. The second set, you might get a little bit. The third set, you'll get a little bit more. And then it starts to diminish to the point where you're not really getting any more benefit. That's my interpretation of the research. And so basically, his conclusion was that in order to, like, if you want to train 10 sets for a given muscle group and you're only going to get maybe 20% more results, a lot of people would gladly sacrifice like 50% more time or 20% more results to go to the gym 50% less often.
I wrote about something along that line in my very first book, Ripped. And
Okay.
if you're thinking, if you say you're going to do 5 sets for an exercise, it's almost impossible to go hard for 5 sets. And my idea was, and getting it down, you're motivated when you're going to go 5 sets. You hold back because you know you have these sets coming. And it's only when you can see the goal line, so to speak, the finish line, that you really go. And that's my rationale for doing 1 or maybe 2 sets per exercise. And that's what I do now. I do a general warm up, and on something like leg press or squats with big muscles, you need to be some warm up there because of your just psychologically, and to get all of your joints working, but still only one really hard set. And some exercise like this, like they say the curl, you don't need but just 1 set. You're ready to go because you've done a lot of other things. Generally, I believe in starting with the biggest muscles of like the squat, the deadlift, things like that, which are the hardest too. So you start with the hardest and you come down to the easiest. The curl, if you start with the curl in with the squat, you might skip the squat. You're probably never going to skip the curl because people like curls, even though, frankly, I do almost all multi-joint exercises, almost no curls or things like that, because it's a more efficient way to train your whole body. You can pick about 5, 7 exercises, train your whole body. And my workouts are whole body workouts.
I think I read a study there that they compared compound movements um, with isolation work and found no difference in like bicep thickness. So
There's
doing chin ups will definitely build your arms.
there's some researchers in the UK. I forget their names now, but I used a lot of their studies, and there's a fact that, just talking about what you just said, that there's no advantage to single joint exercises over multi joint.
Right. So I want to shift it a
It's hard to
little.
convince people of that.
Yeah. I'd like to shift it to basically the conversation of expectations versus reality, because I think when people have realistic expectations, their goals and what they can achieve in what period of time becomes a lot, in their head it's a little bit more motivating. So I think that what do you think about the idea of a genetic limit or a genetic potential? Do you think that that's a true term, or do you think people can always just continue to gain muscle indefinitely?
No, there certainly are genetic limits, but I don't like to focus on that because that gives people an excuse.
Right.
And if you're going to compete, like I took up indoor rowing, and I went to my first competition up in Colorado, and I knew there's a lot of these people and I wrote about this I think in my Lean for Life book, but I try to think about that as a way to improve. So rather than beat these people, I didn't know really how good they were. but I knew what I could do. So I used this competition as a way to improve. And if you think about that, the only competitor that really counts is you. And if you're making progress, you're a winner. But if you think you got to be number one, you're probably going to fail because there only can be one
Right.
number one. But almost everybody can improve. Um, and it's kind of an interesting story. Uh, there was a woman rower up there. I found out later she was a varsity rower, but she beat my time by about 15, 20 seconds. And this is for the 2,500 meters, probably beat it by more than that. But when I went, and she was about my size, there was just no reason in the world why I shouldn't be able to do at least what she did. And I came home within about 3 weeks. I made a new record, but thinking about her as my goal, the reason, something that convinced me that I could do better. It's just like when the 4 minute mile, when Bannister finally made the 4 minute mile, pretty soon everybody was running it. The guys in high school are running the 4 minute
Right.
mile just because if you know somebody else can do it, then you think, well, I can do it. But you still have to think about it in terms of yourself. You are the competitor that counts. You use competition or other people as examples to build and maintain your motivation. But if you improve, you're a winner.
Okay. So my take on the argument of the genetic limit versus not genetic limit, I actually look at it from a positive perspective because um, basically I realize that there's only a certain amount of muscle each person can grow in their lifetime. Not everybody can be like Arnold Schwarzenegger. So, with that being said, it's not a rush to get there. You have many years that you can train, and I think when people can think that way, that they don't have to get to the finish line tomorrow, they're probably much less likely to get injured or to push themselves over the top or too hard, too fast. What would you say about that?
Well, I think that's right. I tell people if they want to be like Arnold, they want to be pick their parents very carefully to
Right.
start number one. But that's definitely the way to think about it.
And with that being said, a lot of the research today, uh, especially in the past 3 decades or so, I'm sure you've heard of the race of studies. When somebody becomes a PhD, they have to get as many papers, studies published as possible in the shortest period of time. That's
But I haven't heard about that.
okay. Yeah. So I have friends who work in academia, and that's basically a common theme is that they want to publish as much as possible because it increases their fame, prestige, and gives them more grant money and things like that.
Right.
So the problem with that, though, is what we have in not only training literature but also nutrition and medicine is that we have all these short-term studies. And over the course of the long term, we don't have a lot to build off of. So, a good example of this is, which I know you cite his research. I enjoy reading Brad Schoenfeld, Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, because he looks at like volume. Basically, is there a dose response to volume? And I mean, what he's found in his studies is that increasing it from 5 sets to 10 reps, you'll get a clear dose response in the amount of hypertrophy. And a lot of other researchers have found the same thing, but I look at that, the way I interpret that research is, but for how long? That's my question. Because even though a high volume routine for 6 weeks or 12 weeks may outbeat, a low volume routine, that can only keep going for so long as the person once they reach their genetic potential or once they start plateauing. Meanwhile, somebody on a low volume routine can probably keep chugging along for a longer period of time. So they may just both get to the same place. It's just that one might get there a little bit faster.
I think people they make training too complicated, and I think there's only two things that are absolutely accepted, and they're true. Everybody accepts it, and that's overload and rest. So
Right.
there's many different ways to overload. You have to push your body, and when you push your body, the way that you're pushing it, then you have to let it rest in order for it to recover. But there's many different ways, and over the course of time, you're going to want to change the way you do it. So there's no really one good way. If you just keep in mind overload and rest,
Okay.
and there's so many different ways, and that can apply to intervals. It applies to everything. And your body is a wonderful mechanism. You challenge it, and it will respond. You have to be reasonable about it, and not destroy yourself with the challenge. But they say if all you do is drink a cup of tea, your body pretty soon that's all you'll be able to do. But thinking about it that way, and don't get bogged down by Joe Blow says this way and somebody
Right.
else that they say my way or the highway. Anybody that says that,
Right.
move on to somebody else. But
So when it comes to you mentioned like listening to your body. What's some advice that you can give people? Like how does somebody know that they're about to push over the edge and overtrain?
well, for one thing, I think keeping a training diary, keeping track, like I said, I look at what I did the last time and try to improve a little bit. And that might be just one rep or a few more pounds, something like that. Uh, and almost anything you try, you're going to finally get to kind of a sticking point, but you don't keep beating your head against the wall there trying to improve that. You think, it's a sticking point, so I need to back off and maybe change the trajectory a little bit and build up again. It's a whole series of these building up and hitting a sticking point and then change and going on. I've done that for 65 years, but you have to think about that. You go to a lot of gyms and you see, I've trained at home practically my whole life, but I know this is true. You go to gyms and you see these people at the over a period of time, they're still doing the same thing over and over and over, and they wonder, why don't I get better? Well, the body's adapted to that. It will do what you ask it to do within reason, uh, and just it's all pretty logical, pretty reasonable. Not trying to make it too complicated. I try to make it as uncomplicated eating and training as possible. And I think of it as pretty simple.
Okay. One of the epiphanies I've had is that a lot of people they talk about aging as if aging is something that prevents you from strength training or exercise. But another thing is I think that stress is analogous to aging. So somebody who's going to school and working part time, and maybe they have a child, or they have a demanding full time job that they have to work 80 hours a week. Um, these things are very common, and the illusion is that, of course, what we talked about earlier, people are being bombarded by different sources, celebrity fitness trainers, professional athletes, people like that, who are telling average, everyday, busy people that they need to train like an athlete. And so, I have family members that I've encouraged to take up strength training, friends, and what discourages them is thinking that they have to spend hours in the gym every week. And I always tell them, you could even just do one good workout a week, and that's way better than doing nothing. So,
It's true.
right,
You have to look at your situation and see where it will fit. There's a famous bodybuilder called Boyer Coe. He's maybe that dates me a little bit talking about him, but there was a stage where the only time he could train was in the middle of the night. So he trained in the middle of the night. but you look for ways to do it. You probably heard of Bill Pearl. Bill Pearl trains early in the morning. He said he takes care of himself first, and then he takes care of the rest of the world. So you have to figure out how it's going to work. About the only time in my life that I really did have to back off from training was at certain times during law school. Even though actually I made some state records that my classmates were kidding me. I not only was tops in the class, but I made state records all in the same week. But so I did it, but I did have to adjust because the law school was so demanding. So you just have to think about it that way. But there's almost always, whether it's just take a walk regularly, hell, you can walk around the house, and
Right.
you'll be more productive. You'll be whatever you do, you'll do it better. But just getting active and it can adjust um, over time because your situation is going to change, and just be a little flexible and don't be rigid thinking I got to do this. You don't got to do this. You do what you can do.
Okay. So if an exercise hurts to do, say you're bench pressing and your shoulder hurts, what would you tell somebody who comes to you and asks you that?
Well, the one rule is if it hurts, don't do it. Um, so you have to be able to kind of assess what is a damaging hurt and what maybe is just pushing the muscle a little more than it's used to. Um, and as you get as old as I do, you'll find that you don't. It was a mistake. I probably did too much stuff for my back. My back bothers me now, but you're not thinking about that at the time. But if it hurts, don't do it is just a good rule to keep in mind.
Okay.
Uh, and if your shoulder hurts, there's many different ways to train your shoulders. Uh, when I was training for bodybuilding competition when I was in my 40s, that it hurt to do the overhead press. Hurt my shoulder because I hurt my shoulder doing a jerk with a heavy weight. But you can find other ways, like I could do the upright row. They get the shoulders just as much, but it didn't hurt. Or you can, there's different ways to do it. So when you have an injury like that, there's almost always some way to train
Right.
around. Um, and if you have an injury, just doing something that circulates the blood, just short of pain, that will speed recovery. So there's always some way you can do it. And if you think about that, you don't have to do things just this way. There's other ways to do it. But that upright row,
Okay.
uh, I, I don't think my shoulders suffered one darn bit because I couldn't do the overhead press at
Okay. Yeah, in the past I've had, all kinds of various aches and pains and things. I've always found it's two things. Either I was doing the exercise incorrectly. Like for example, squats, for a little while I had a hip pain, but what I realized was I wasn't bracing my core before descending. So my hip was just digging into my upper thigh. So I fixed that, but sometimes you are doing the exercise correctly, um, and you just get pattern overload, like excessive motion doing the same thing over week in, week out. Um, an example with me is the bench press. So I've had shoulder pain in the past from that.
bench press is murder
Yeah.
and for everybody. It's a really
So what I found after trying all these different rotator cuff exercises to strengthen the rotator cuff and doing all this band work and stretching, really what helped, because I still wanted to train my chest, but doing all these other things didn't help. What helped was stopping bench pressing. And what I did at the time was I actually bought a Swiss bar. I'm not sure if you're aware of what a Swiss bar is, but it's basically a neutral grip bar that you can load plates on. And I started benching that way.
right.
Well, completely eliminated the pain.
Yeah.
So I think it has something to do with the fact that it's pronated, and it just can cause that motion of like your AC joint, or I'm not up on the anatomy of
Right.
it,
Just
but
doing it with dumbbells allows you to get an angle uh, that is comfortable. Something else I've discovered recently, I kind of poo-pooed for a long time, but was resistance bands. And you can train if you some imagination at resistance bands over your whole body. And your body probably can tolerate that better than some other things. Um, I use resistance bands, not all the way, but I have a friend of mine, is Dr. Dick Winnett, and he and his wife travel a lot, and he wouldn't go any place unless he checked ahead of time to see where the gym was. But he found at times that his wife wanted to go places where he couldn't find the gym, and he solved that problem by taking the resistance bands. And he said he was able to train the whole body with those resistance bands. You can use pile up two or three of
right.
them. There's just many different ways to do it. Um, so there's just an endless ways to train, and there's almost always some way to if you break your arm or something, obviously you're going to have to wait till that heals up. But short of that, there's almost always the way to just challenge your muscles.
Okay. So for some people, exercise really is like an addiction, and when I say that, they're more so addicted to doing the movements themselves, getting in the gym, that the endorphins that come with it. They're more addicted to that than actually the success that they achieve from the program. So I think that yeah, to quote somebody told me once, you want to live life, but don't let life live you. And other so in other words, take it easy. So when somebody comes to me and they're overtrained, um, one of the first things I do is I tell them that, and it's really difficult for some people who are basically they're addicted. They just are there for the feeling of it, and instead of being there for the results that they get. What would you tell somebody like that?
Well, it's the same thing that we've been talking about.
Right.
There's different ways to do it. Uh, if they're really wedded to that motion and it doesn't cause any harm, I say go ahead and keep doing it. Uh, but be careful about how often you do it. And uh, one of the best exercises ever is the squat and the deadlift. But as I got older, I have a genetic curvature in my back, and it just causes a kind of an uneven stress. And so I have stenosis in my back. So, but I needed to, I had to stop doing the squats and the deadlift because it compresses my back and pinches the nerves. And boy, that nerve makes everything work. So I had to find other ways, but there's plenty of other ways to work your lower back, your hips, and your legs. The, the leg press, for one thing, puts less stress on your lower back, but that can put stress too if you getting to do too much. But you can change the angle of that, or you can do the back raise. There's a kind of like a hyperextension, but I've got a equipment that you can change the distance between your hips and where your position on there. But you can do back raises, which is getting your rear end and getting your lower back, or you can do something called the glute ham, where you're pulling yourself further on up, so you're getting the hamstrings. That's very effective. I do that on this unit called the glute ham machine, and then I have a little stool there where I can put weights there. So that's another way to get those muscles without compressing the spine. And it's an example to build around a problem. Those muscles in the core of your body are the most important muscles you have because they drive everything. So you don't want to have those muscles deteriorate, but you don't want to injure yourself either. So obviously I've been doing this for a long, long time. So I think about more different ways to do it, but there's almost always a way to train the muscle that doesn't cause problems.
So it's a personal question, but how old are you now, Clarence?
I'm 81.
Okay. It's fantastic. Like where I work in my field, I, one of the number one reasons why people end up in a nursing home is because of weakness, muscle weakness. Believe it or not, I tell people that and they don't believe me. So a lot of people, as they get older, they've lived a sedentary lifestyle for so long, and they've been so inactive that before they know it, dropping their toothbrush on the floor and trying to pick it up, they can fall from that, or just stepping out of a car or something, and they
Go
can,
go to the doctor's
yeah,
office and look in the waiting room, and some people cannot get up off the chair
yeah,
without help. And I've just written an article on our website about muscle memory, and the recent research shows that exercise you did as a teenager, where you built the nuclei with the kind of the force behind the muscle fiber that allows it to grow bigger and stronger. And they're showing that even years later, when you're inactive and you're atrophied, that those nuclei are still there. So it gives you the ability to develop more strength and muscle than if you hadn't done that. Obviously, ideally, you want to start doing it and never stop. If you do that, you're going to be ahead of the curve over inactive people your whole life, and you're going to be like at me, a very active because I kept working those muscles. But almost anything you can do is going to be helpful, and people that are older usually can respond, but if you have to start at a very low level, it would be better if they started earlier and kept doing it. But it certainly hits hard there,
yeah.
as you say, when you get to the point where you can't do things.
And I'll tell you something. A lot of the people I see are a lot younger than you are. So people in their 50s, 60s, and they're having these movement issues because of sedentarism. So,
Have
um,
you heard a book called Bending the Aging Curve? Uh, I've written about just a new article where I brought this muscle memory thing in, but he has a chart in there about people that train their whole life, the trajectory of their aging curve, and then those that start at 40 and those that never train, and just the whole level, the people that start training early, like me, and they're just soaring over everybody else all the way down. So when you get to be 75, you have the muscle mass of an untrained person at 20, and at 90, you're as good as somebody at 60. So it pays off, and it pays off. It becomes more and more important as you get older. I think of it as an ever going V, that it gets wider and wider as the years go by between you and people who don't train, just like night and day. Um, Obviously, if you spent most of your life out without training, all you can do is you have what's ahead of you. So you just start out and do it in a way that you can handle, and it will pay off. And if you get to these people that, um, I guess, very late in life, that even that they will respond to some extent. But exercise, that's there's nothing can beat what you can do for yourself. No doctor, no drug can do what exercise can do for you, but you have to do that. No doctor will do it for
mhm.
you. Can't do it. Many of them don't do it.
So another thing about Clarence for everybody who's watching, he's always stayed lean. So have you ever gone through any kind of bulking phase? Because every picture I've seen you completely peeled, ripped.
No, not really. I never have. in my early years, I focused mainly on the Olympic lifts. I don't think I ever did more than 5 reps almost ever. And on our website, we have pictures of me from 18 to 81. And you'll see that I developed a lot of muscle early on. And when I moved on, I, I focused on the Olympic lifts until I finally got to a point where I felt like I wasn't going to get any better. But I saw people older than me who were doing well in bodybuilding competition, and we had the over 40 competitions. And I thought that, this is something that where I can do well. I did. I won my class at the Fast 40 Mr. America. I won most muscular man in the Fast 40 Mr. USA. But I think that was mainly just trimming down. I don't think I did add some muscle probably in some areas, but I built most of my muscle early on, and then I maintained it. And and I the fat loss process has got to be a slow process so you don't destroy your muscle mass, and also you don't want to starve yourself because and a lot of competitive bodybuilders do that, and they look wonderful. They're really defined on stage. You see them about a month later, you wouldn't even know it was the same guy because they starve themselves so much that they overreact later on. I've never done that, even when I was at my competing. I never gained it all back. I never had any urge to stuff myself later on. Um, and partly it was because I didn't starve myself going into the competition. I did it slow and methodically and kept training, and obviously it worked.
So, would you say that bulking in the traditional sense where somebody just gorges on a bunch of food, eats 1,000 extra calories than they actually need, so they gain all this weight. Do you think that's counterproductive? Because
Absolutely, I think it's
yeah,
counterproductive,
because
and
in
that's a lot of them do.
right,
They in the off season they gain a lot of weight. They think they're putting on muscle, and then they have to bring the weight off, and a lot of the muscle comes off along with it. They'd be a lot better to maintain their muscle strength doing the weight training, but not starving themselves and not stuffing themselves if you just stay on an even keel. And it's kept me lean for a very, very long time. Uh, I was in California one time. We were getting some pictures taken by a fellow who had photographed just about everybody. And after we took the pictures, we went and had dinner. And he was surprised that I didn't stuff myself. He never said he'd never seen anything like that before. I did have dessert, but I only had one dessert. And he was shocked that I didn't stuff myself after the photo shoot. But I didn't have any urge to
right.
because I never deprived myself going in. I think that's a very important thing to realize in terms of long-term training.
Yeah, I mean in
It's
my
your body having your weight go up and down too.
right. In my experience with bulking, I've basically at this point I've completely stopped. Um, at this period of my life, I'm just kind of coasting and maybe doing many ups and many 5 pounds gain, 5 pounds loss, but nothing drastic. And I could tell you from my experience putting on 20 pounds in 5 months years ago, by the time I finally cut down, I was basically the same size that I was before. So it almost was pointless.
Exactly.
And I see that a lot in other people as well. Um,
I keep a
so,
weight record. If you came to my house, I could show you a weight record going back to 1990. And it's a way to, I don't count calories either. I eat basically a whole food diet and enough I never make myself hungry, but I weigh myself on the Tanita body composition scale every week. I do it Saturday morning. Uh, to make the scale work, you have to come to it in the same condition each week so that measuring apples and apples and not apples and oranges. Um, so I'm monitoring that, and if I see that I'm getting a little out of where I want to be, I adjust. But you can make very small adjustments, and for the most part, I don't need to make any adjustments. I'm pretty much on an even keel,
Okay.
but that's important, I think. And you drive yourself crazy if you want to weigh yourself every day because you're having little changes in the activity from day to day. Everybody does. They have kind of a rhythm to their week. But you pick the same day and come. So I get up in the morning, go to the bathroom, and weigh myself. So you're weighing yourself under the same circumstances, and I think that is helpful. If you don't overdo it. Once a week is plenty.
Now, there's another kind of I think it's somewhat of a myth going around right now. It's been going around for a few years. The 48-hour rule of protein synthesis. So researchers, found in a lab that basically after 48 hours for somebody who's a natural trainee, they no longer have elevated levels of protein synthesis. And so the interpretation that a lot of people derived from this was that, oh, okay, we need to train very frequently because you stop growing after 48 hours. Now, I know that's a myth, and I've read several of your articles how important it is, how important rest is for recovery. And sometimes a muscle can take many, many days before it's ready to go again. What would you say about that?
No, I think that's right. And people, they've been sold on protein supplements. I don't use supplements. I don't think you need supplements. The best thing is to eat a balanced diet with some high quality protein in every meal. Um, and your body can only absorb so much protein, so there's no sense in loading it up on one meal. You just eat the protein over the course of the day, and I think that's you're going to consume as much protein as you need, uh, and you're not going to be jerking your your meals around either. It's pretty simple again.
Right. And not to say that protein synthesis is not important. I'm not saying that, but I think that people look at that one thing and give it too much credence. Whereas, we also have the central nervous system that needs to recover, um, the collagen system in our joints and ligaments. I think that takes a lot longer than 48 hours
Sure.
um, to rebuild. So, yeah, people need to definitely consider everything and not just one thing. One of my favorite quotes that I saw from you: you can train long and you can train hard, but you can't do both. Can you explain? Can you explain that?
Well, it's again the idea of training hard and then giving yourself time to recover. Um, the long is more and more sets, uh, or I guess endurance. Um, if you train hard, you can only go so fast. You're going to have to slow down it over a long period of time. So it's either all out. I'm losing my train of thought there, but you get the basic
Yeah,
idea.
absolutely. Um, so one thing I really wanted to ask you, and I think this is pretty much the last question I have, and you kind of explained it already, but a lot of people find that when they get to sub 10%, sub 8% body fat, I work with a lot of male clients that have like low testosterone. So a lot of people who have a history of excessive amounts of exercise or a lot of crash dieting. And basically, a lot of times when people get below a certain threshold of body fat, their hormone levels start to crash. Now, looking at you, it seems like that never really happened in your case. Do you think that that's because of your approach to dieting and exercise and that you had a much a less stressful approach than a lot of people take.
No, I think it's definitely my approach. When I go to the Cooper Clinic, they measure my testosterone, and interestingly, my most recent reading, the 788, was the best one in a long time. And I've written articles about comparing exercise, comparing high intensity training versus, and with a balanced diet against testosterone replacement therapy. And in my experience, the exercise is much better when you go on, start taking testosterone. You're suppressing your body's natural production of testosterone. So you're going to have to keep taking it. Uh, you're going to suppress other things, but I think that you can have very good success maintaining your testosterone just by exercising regularly and eating properly. Um, my experience with that, and maybe it's partly just my genetics,
Right.
but that's worked very well. And the people that are going to the doctors, and somebody that naturally has a low testosterone level, they can be somebody that would really help. But most people, they're going there to be more muscular or feel younger and so on and so on. And I think that doing that through lifestyle is a much more sensible
Right.
and I think more result producing way to do it. And those doctors are making a fortune.
Now, I personally have a history of low testosterone, but actually was able to correct the issue. Um, I came from a background of exercising like 10 hours a day, doing BMX biking, things like that, and in addition to that, doing weights. So a big part of that was just taking it easy. But another thing, you know, I worked with doctors years ago to try to figure out what the reason was and everything. Um, I always have found that when I get more sunlight, I have higher testosterone, much higher, like 100 or 200% higher than in the winter when it's been like.
Get more what?
Um, I've had much higher levels of testosterone after spending months in the sun, going outside, getting sunlight. Whereas in the winter, that would be because I test like several times a year, and those are my lower points. So, have you found that as well, like sunlight to be, you know, pro hormone, good for that?
No, I've never experienced that. As you get older, you got to be more careful about skin
Yeah.
cancers. Of course, I did a lot of sunbathing when I was competing, and so I had some things on my head, my bald head, that have to be zapped regularly by the dermatologist. So I'm pretty careful about getting too much sun.
Okay. So I think that about covers everything for me. Do you have anything that you want to close with? Anything you want to add to inform people?
Well, I'd like to encourage them to visit our website. It's cbass.com. They can't spell Clarence. They want to spell it Clarence. So cbass.com. We post new articles every month. As I mentioned earlier, we posted the article number 485, 486, and 487 in this recent post. And this is not just do it because I say so. These are research-based articles, and they're cutting-edge stuff. And I try to write it in a way that appeals to people. And what people seem to like is at the end I have my take, my assessment of it. Um, so if you want to, I think it's very motivating to follow this. What I'm interested in doing is helping people help themselves, self-help. I don't get into things that only a doctor can do. It's just something that you can do for yourself and lifestyle. Uh, and as I mentioned before, we have this training pictorial of me, pictures. I managed to get pictures over the course of my life and seeing me at every stage of life between 15 and over 80. Um, and we also have a fitness personalities page. We write about important people, Jack LaLanne, people like that, people that I know. Um, I think it just we hope it's a very interesting website. That's basically what we do now is prepare those articles from month to month, and of course keep training. And they say at 75 is when you start to decline. So I started taking pictures at 76. So we've got pictures, articles where I wrote about my everyday condition. It's not any, I don't have any skin color or cut the hair off or anything, but photos at 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81. There's almost no change in terms of those photos. So trying to illustrate that. So I provide my own example of the benefits of a healthy lifestyle, plus with all the latest research. And we're learning things all the time. It's very exciting that um, there's a lot more research being done about exercise now because they've found just how important and just all of the wonderful things that exercise will do. So come to our website.
And I can say personally, I've read dozens of your articles, and one thing about Clarence's articles is um, it may not be sexy, but it's absolutely what you need to hear. Um, a lot of the a lot of what you say is very simple advice, but people want to be people want complexity. For some reason, people want to add complexity to their lives because they think that will get them there faster.
A lot of these studies are very complicated, but I pride myself
Right.
in being able to simplify it in a way that I can understand and that the reader can understand. And I think it just makes it's a challenge to do it. I enjoy doing it. Um, as I get older, my short-term memory is not as good as it was. But what I really do well is is figuring out how various various ideas work together. Uh, so a lot of the articles are from different angles, they're kind of making the same point. And anyway, we enjoy doing that. And we think we do one hell of a good job.
Thank you, Clarence. It was a true pleasure to be able to speak to you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I enjoyed talking to you, and you're like you're living your own message, which is a good thing. You'll
Thank
learn more as you go along.
thank
You
you.
never stop learning.